welcome to the Lawrence University Career Center podcast. I'm Ty Collins, and today we have a fantastic guest, someone whose career has taken some fascinating twists and turns. Matt Murphy, a proud member of the Lawrence University class of 2006, holds dual degrees, a Bachelor of Arts in Theater and a Bachelor of Music in Vocal Performance. After spending 6 years as a professional actor and theater producer, Matt made the transition into the corporate world and has been with the prestigious law firm Skadden, Arps, Slate, Meagher Flom and affiliates in New York City since 2011. Over the years, he's taken on a variety of roles and currently serves as the Associate Director of the Operations Group. In addition to his professional career, Matt has remained connected to Lawrence. He's been a member of the Lawrence Alumni Association Board of Directors for the past 7 years and has spent the last 3 years as president. Matt brings a unique perspective on career transitions, leadership, and discipline and commitment to your profession. And we're thrilled to have him with us today. Welcome, Matt.
Thanks. I'm really happy to be here, Ty.
Matt, I'd like to start with your time at Lawrence. Thinking back, what do you most remember about your time at LU?
It's an easy one for me to start with. It's the people. The people meaning friends. I would say many of the folks that I'm still closest to in my life today are Lawrence alumni, and these are people who I met when I was 18 years old. I'm almost 41 now, so do the math. And it also means professors who became mentors, and some of them became friends over time. And a few of them, including Tim Troy and Kathy Pravat and Philip Swan, these are all people who are still teaching at Lawrence, which is pretty amazing.
As I mentioned in our intro, you do have a Bachelor of Arts in Theater, Bachelor of Music and Vocal Performance. After graduation, you spent several years in theater. Can you tell us about that? And then your eventual transition away from the stage and then into your business career.
I fell in love with the theater at Lawrence, I think is the best way to describe it. The theater was a place that allowed me to fully express myself and to be around people who were accepting of that, accepting of me, fully expressing who I was. This was not something that was very familiar to me at the time. I had done theater in high school, but the crowd in my high school theater department was just much different than being around a crowd of Laurentian theater people. That was in the best ways. Laurentian theater people really sort of changed the trajectory of my life. And Lawrence really, I think, was a place that accepted me for who I was, but the theater department became this intense little microcosm of acceptance. And it was, again, it was something that I'd never experienced before. So it really springboarded me into a completely different path than I ever expected. And some of my biggest accomplishments as a Lawrence student were in the theater, on stage, acting or singing, yes, but also building full productions. I'd never done that before. It was something I'd never imagined I would do until I got to Lawrence. And in fact, during my 4th year of 5, because I was a double degree student, I studied for a semester at the Gaiety School of Acting in Dublin, which is a program that I think still exists. I think I was in the first group of Laurentians who got to go to the Gaiety School, but people are still going today, I believe. And I realized while I was there that acting required a lot more craft, like singing, than I gave it credit for. And frankly, I had a lot to learn about acting. And at the same time, I was getting close to my last year at school and knew I would need a plan for what to do next. So it made sense to me to audition for graduate schools. I don't think I thought of it as a cop-out, but in a way, it made the most sense, of all of the different possibilities that included getting a job somewhere else, moving to a big city and starting to audition, whatever that would look like. Auditioning for graduate school seemed like, well, I could learn more. And it also felt, I think, safe to me because I'd been in school for so long and didn't really know anything else. So I ended up going to the UNC Chapel Hill MFA program. That's the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill MFA acting program. MFA means Master of Fine Arts. And the program pretty much funneled me and my classmates into New York because it was on the East Coast. A lot of the guest artists we worked with were in New York. The showcase for industry professionals that we did at the end of our 3 years was in New York. So it kind of felt silly to move anywhere else. I'd also sort of thought about moving to New York as a kid in this very sort of vague pie in the sky way, but it became very real when I was in graduate school because it's just all people talked about, especially in the last year. And once I got here, it's safe to say that I learned a lot. The focus, the energy, the stamina it takes to audition enough simply for people to know who you are, let alone to get a job in the theater, it was really humbling. And it made having the job when you got it feel so precious because you didn't know when you were going to get another job, frankly. And producing shows was similar in that it took, again, a level of discipline and sort of relentlessness that hadn't been required of me before just to make a show happen in an expensive city, let alone to make it a show that people would want to see. So yeah, I don't think I ever could have learned that in anywhere else, outside of New York City. It was just it was like being shot out of a cannon almost. And at the same time, I needed to make ends meet when I wasn't working in the theater. So I took a part-time job as an overnight legal assistant and document processor in this odd little department called the operations group at a law firm called Skadden Arps. So I think, spoiler alert, you can see where this is going later. And I worked off hours there for about 6 years. And then in 2016 or so, I hit a crossroads. I guess I loved my life in the theater a lot. I loved a lot of things about it, but I was at a point where I needed some balance. In the theater, I felt like I was giving, say, 90% of myself and getting back maybe 10%. And when I thought about it, Skadden was the first and the only job I'd ever had where I felt like I got back as much as I was putting into it. So when I was looking to pivot in my professional life for something that would allow me some more stability, I decided to look for something different within Skadden first. And it was a real Hail Mary. I wrote a job description for a role in my department that I saw needed to be filled, explaining what the job requirements would be, how they made up a full-time position, and finally why I was a good candidate for it. Completely crazy feeling at the time. I had no idea what to expect. And I sent it to the head of our division, who is now my direct boss, and said, basically, I don't know if this is something you'd even be interested in, but if it is, let's talk. 3 months later, I started the job, which was as training supervisor in our department. And I haven't, as they say, looked back since.
So you created your own job.
Yes, I did. I created my own job, which I freely admit is not going to be everyone's experience.
But it does happen.
But it does happen. And I do feel like it is a very Laurentian experience. I feel like going through a Lawrence education really teaches you to look at things differently. And for me, it taught me to think outside the box and to think big about what was possible for me. Not necessarily what I could do at that moment, but what I thought I could learn to do, what I thought I would learn a lot by doing. And so that sort of Laurentian spirit, that can-do spirit, is something that led me towards this impulse to write this job description for myself.
It takes a lot of confidence to do something like that, and most people wouldn't take that chance.
Yeah, and it could have gone in a much different direction or just nowhere.
Right,
But it happened to work out.
I want to go back to something you said in that answer where you felt theater and performing was taking 90% of you, but only giving back 10. Can you explain that a little more?
There was something I observed in a lot of my peers who were trying to work as actors in New York City at the time that was really interesting to me because I didn't identify with it. And that was, there's a large group of early career actors who spend, let's say, anywhere from 6 to 11 months a year doing really challenging sort of thankless jobs, be they bartending or waiting tables or cater waitering or nannying or temping or telemarketing, just jobs that don't necessarily have a path forward, built into them. They're doing this hours and hours and hours a week to try to make ends meet while they're also just auditioning their tails off and waiting for the, let's say, 2 weeks to 1 month to several months a year where they actually get to do the thing that they have always wanted to do, which is to be on stage. And I saw so many people who were sort of comfortable with that balance, with the idea that they would spend 10, 11 months a year doing something they really didn't want to be doing in service of the 1 or 2 months a year where they would get to do the thing that they wanted to do. And that was how much they loved it. That was how much they loved the doing of the thing. They loved it so much that they could spend the vast majority of their life trying and failing to do it, knowing that at some point they would be able to do it, even if it was just for a short amount of time. And I had so much respect for that level of commitment and that level of sort of relentless drive. And, that is the spirit of someone who ultimately, will get to do the job more, will get to be the actor more as they continue to do the work and continue to sort of keep at it. But I just didn't love it enough to be comfortable with that balance. I think that's what I mean.
Yeah. No, that's good. I mean, that's a good story to hear and a good perspective.
Right. And that's a story, by the way, that is not unique to me. I think
Yeah.
99% of the theater artists, actors, whatever brand of theater they're working in, or film, frankly, film and television, same thing, would say something similar. They would say, especially at the beginning, they spent so much more time not working in the theater or in film or television than they did actually working in film or television or theater.
You referenced how that led to your time at Skadden Arps. You are now the associate director of the operations group. Can you tell us more about Skadden? What drew you there? And I know you mentioned it was kind of starting with the overnight job. And tell us about what you do today.
Skadden is a global full-service law firm. We have nearly 4,000 employees, more than half of whom are lawyers, and in 22 offices across 5 different continents. Full-service law firm means that we have lawyers with expertise all across practice areas in corporate law, litigation, and regulatory matters. Our lawyers also do a certain percentage of pro bono work each year. So people or companies can come to Skadden with any type of legal problem and get assistance. Usually it is companies. I mean, obviously Skadden lawyers do represent individuals, but I think the most prominent work that our lawyers do is for, corporations, for lack of a better word. And honestly, what drew me to Skadden at first was that I needed a job. I wish it were more glamorous than that, but I was struggling to make ends meet during downtime between theater gigs, and this weird off-hours job at a law firm offered me flexibility, a decent wage, and a chance to use different parts of my brain than I was using as an actor or producer, which I was never expecting to have as a side benefit for in a part-time job, but that was the truth. So when it comes to my role currently, the operations group is a 24/7 global concierge service for attorney support. So no matter the day or the time, attorneys across our offices are submitting requests to our department for document processing, paralegal work, reprographics and high-speed printing, graphic design, SEC filings, a plethora of different types of support tasks, many of which are billed to clients. And as the associate director of the department, I partner with our group's chief officer to oversee our function in New York, which is about 120 people, and also work with managers in other offices to integrate an additional 20 or so global staff members into our department's workflow.
I bet even though it's very different than what you went to college for and what you did for your first few years out of college, your time in theater probably in some way shapes your approach to your career and to your leadership style. Is that true? And if so, how does it do so?
Yeah, it's definitely true. I mean, first things first, it forced me to think outside the box. As an actor, like I mentioned, you typically spend more time not working than working. So you have to get really creative when it comes to keeping your artistic instrument sharp. In fact, some of my producing projects were born of creative ideas that I had either on my own or with other people during downtime. And frankly, that's not dissimilar to how that job description I wrote for training supervisor came about. Mm-hmm. And the other thing I would say is, as a leader, I think a lot about empathy. Mm-hmm. There's no one way to lead a team or shape or guide a team member. And when in doubt, I try to contextualize a challenge or an opportunity at work in terms of who's involved, what their strengths are, what I know they might be struggling with. It's a business at the end of the day, right? So most decisions, especially big picture decisions, are not made because of how people feel. But for me, the way these decisions are communicated and the way I work through them with people is heavily influenced by what I know each person needs or will respond to. And so much of that approach is informed by my theater training, because getting an MFA in acting is sort of like getting an MFA or a master's degree in empathy, And working with actors as a producer requires a lot of those same skills, because what they're dealing with, what they're working with as a troupe of actors in a play that you're producing is the emotional life of human beings. Whether you're in the theater or not, human beings have emotional lives that sort of guide the way that they are or are not successful in the workplace. And staying in tune with that is, for me, incredibly important.
I work here at Lawrence with many of our pre-law interested students. As they consider going down that legal path, I'm wondering what are some changes you've observed in legal operations over the years, and what are some changes you see happening in the industry in the near future?
I came into the field in 2011 at a time when technology was already dramatically changing how work gets done. And the most significant result of that technology was at the time that the work was starting to get done a lot faster than it ever had before, which also meant that clients were starting to expect the work to get done a lot faster, especially from a support department like ours. And inflation across industries, across the world, really means legal services are more expensive. So going forward, clients are going to scrutinize bills differently than they have before. And the worker who is doing the billable work will have a greater responsibility to use their time wisely, use their time efficiently, and also to bill responsibly. And I guess it'd be silly to talk about technology without mentioning artificial intelligence. As in other industries, lawyers, especially young lawyers and young staff, professional staff members, are hungry to incorporate AI into doing their work as much as they possibly can. And as management, I find we are working to balance the excitement around AI and the great strengths of AI or potential strengths of AI with the challenges it presents, especially for users who might not be fully aware of its limitations, because a lot of the generative AI tools that are used in our industry, present a work product in a nicely wrapped little box with a bow on it, and it could be either a little bit or a lot of it false, just completely made up, and you can't be swayed by how it looks or how it reads. You really have to do the investigative work to QC the work product before you use it for anything substantive. But really, the AI train has left the station, right? So in the operations group, we're in the early stages of really investigating the best ways to use it to enhance and speed up our work. And I have to admit, I can't see that going anywhere but up. We're only going to, going to get more pressure from attorneys, from other law firms in the industry, from clients, just from the way the world's moving, to continue to just integrate AI more and more as time goes on.
So you work with a lot of lawyers, you're aware of what's going on in the legal field. What are some things you think Lawrence pre-law students can be doing now before law school to kind of get a taste of what careers in law are like?
Well, look, the first thing I always advise students to do is to decide if being a lawyer is what you want to do beyond the shadow of a doubt. If you know now, as a 19, 20, 21-year-old person, that you are going to be a lawyer no matter what, then that probably means you'll want to go straight to law school after Lawrence. And if that's what you want, you should be taking courses to support that goal. Definitely looking for summer jobs or internships in the legal field, because that sort of temporary work experience is going to be important for you in your law school applications too. And perhaps most importantly, making plans to take the LSAT before it's time for you to apply to law school, which also means making plans to study for the LSAT, because my gosh, studying for the LSAT is a huge time commitment, especially while you're a full-time student. So making sure that you're building that into your life plans, whether it's during an academic year or over a summer or both, is incredibly important. And if you're not 100% sure being a lawyer is what you want, then I encourage you to plan to take a couple of years between Lawrence and law school to find a job in the field, like being a paralegal, for example. A lot of law firms, Skadden included, hire paralegals straight out of college to give them sort of a crash course in working for a law firm for a few years before they go to law school. I'm not going to lie, it's very intense, but the good news is you come out of it with a clear sense of whether being a lawyer is the right choice for you. And I've seen firsthand a lot of paralegals at Skadden come out of that experience being so grateful that they had it, because it taught them that they wanted to go work for a nonprofit instead. or
Mm.
go join the Peace Corps, or go learn to be a public school teacher, or go to business school instead of law school, right? I mean, there are a lot of different other paths. And just because you think during college, I might want to go to law school, or you have someone in your life telling you maybe you should go to law school, doesn't mean that ultimately that's what you're going to want to do. And having some work experience before going to law school in a law firm environment or a legal environment is probably the best way to know for sure whether that's something you want or not.
That's usually one of the first questions I'll ask a student when they tell me is, I went to law school. I'll say, why?
Yeah. Why? Yeah.
And if they can't answer, then okay, let's talk more. So,
Right. And especially if you're a first year at Lawrence, the world is your oyster. I mean, being 18 years old, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I actually didn't become a theater major. I didn't really discover theater or voice until I was 19. So if you had asked
mm,
me that question, Ty, when I was 18 and a first year at Lawrence, I might have actually been a person who said, well, maybe I do want to go to law school. And you would have asked me why, and I would have said, well, I don't know. It seems like a worthwhile thing to do. It seems
mhm.
it seems like a career path that a lot of people I know talk about doing. And at 18, that's perfectly natural. But obviously it's not the way that it played out for me. And I think it's not the way that it necessarily plays out for a lot of folks.
I'd like to speak more broadly about the world of work. In your 13 plus years at Skadden, you've had 8 distinct roles, so several promotions to achieve that. Can you talk about moving up within an organization and what students should know about getting noticed and getting promoted once they are in the workforce?
I can tell you it's not one size fits all. The reason I'm in the role I have now is because I took a chance 8 years ago and happened to have a boss who was interested in thinking about things differently. So when that job description hit her inbox, she had a level of curiosity about it that obviously I'm very grateful for. In no way was I depending on. And a different person might have just looked at that thing that I wrote and not given it the time of day, or worse, sort of thought, who is this person saying like, I have this job that I think you need and that I think I should do. I mean, it was, that was a lightning in the bottle moment. As I think I said earlier, it's really important to stress that that's not always how it goes. And in that case, the single most important thing you can do, in my estimation, is to show up and be all in. Be prepared for this coming out of college, especially when you're new to the workforce. You also probably have more energy than you'll ever have, and you'll be the least stuck in any habits and more open to whatever is in front of you. It's much easier to be open and led in different directions and to develop better work habits in that time of your life that will pay dividends for you later. In some ways, it's the most important time to be a good worker, the very
Mhm.
first thing that you ever do. It sets the tone for what work looks like, both for you and for the people around you. And in my case, that's how I approached my job, I think, when I first started as a part-time overnight legal assistant in 2011. And I'm still reaping the benefits of that approach now, almost 14 years later.
Can you share any key experiences that have shaped your leadership style or any memorable moments in your career that you think have made you successful?
It's funny, Ty, the two examples that come to me are both from the theater, even though now I would say my career is legal management, legal staff management. The two examples are from the theater. The first one was from my first year of graduate school at UNC Chapel Hill. When you're an actor in the MFA program, you're also doubling as a company member in the resident professional theater company called Playmakers Repertory Company that's housed at UNC, but it's sort of operates as a somewhat separate entity, as a professional theater company. And so my first professional theater production that I ever acted in was in my first semester of graduate school. I think my first day of rehearsal was my first day of class. And I was in way over my head. I was cast in a track that required me to play, I think, three or four different small roles. And within maybe a week or 2 weeks of the 4 to 5 week rehearsal process, it became clear to the director at the time, who was a somewhat young, up and coming director from New York City, became clear to him that I was not ready for the level of responsibility that I was given. And so he sat me down one day at the beginning of rehearsal, maybe a week and a half, 2 weeks in, and delivered a very difficult message to me, which is that he was going to reduce the size of my track so that I would only be playing, I think, 1 or 2 roles instead of 3 or 4. And what I remember about it is that he delivered that message with so much compassion and tact. He was aware that it would not be easy for me to hear, but that it was a decision that he needed to make. And it was ultimately something that was going to be better for me and for the production. And I think about how much differently that could have gone if he had delivered the message differently, or if he had decided to just let me keep sort of floundering, because I was floundering, and I would have probably kept floundering if I hadn't been sort of given a narrower focus, just to really sink my teeth into. That's a moment that I keep with me now in my leadership roles at Skadden, because it's no one's favorite job to deliver difficult messages, but sometimes you have to. It goes back to the empathy piece. I mean, being able to meet a person where they are and really deliver the message in a productive, compassionate way is, for me, vital. And the other example that comes to mind was actually from the last producing project before my pivot at Skadden that I took on. And this was a production that I spent a year working on. It was a new play that was being premiered in New York and then taken overseas for a month. And I think the reason it stands out to me is because I've never worked on anything harder in my life, or I should say, never worked harder on anything in my life, especially raising money to put the production up, which was something I had never been responsible for before. And frankly, I really didn't feel comfortable doing it, but we had to raise something like $15,000 or $20,000, which, when you're a struggling troupe of actors in New York City, $15,000 to $20,000 feels like, well, I may as well be raising like $5 million. I may as well be raising $20 billion. Like it was crazy. It felt crazy to be asking people for that kind of money, but we had to do it. Otherwise, the production literally would not have happened. In addition, the company was depending on me to literally feed, house, and transport them, because you're taking people overseas. Some of these are people who've never worked overseas before. There were multiple people in the company who were going through some real personal challenges along the same route as working on this play, and it was requiring a level of care and oversight on my part that, quite frankly, I wasn't sure if I was fully capable of rising. I wasn't sure if I was fully capable of rising to meet that challenge, but ultimately I did. And I don't think I've ever felt more accomplished. And it's really helped me contextualize some of the the challenges that I've encountered in my professional life since then. Because even though I've had to do some difficult things, here at Skadden, like nothing has really held a candle in terms of the scope and amount of the work to that experience.
If I can do that, I can do anything. Right?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think I saw that at the time, but looking back on it years later, that is definitely how it feels.
We've talked about 2 distinct portions of your career so far, Matt. So let's talk about a third. You are the president of the Lawrence Alumni Association Board of Directors. Tell us what that is, how the board's work affects students, and why you've chosen to remain involved with Lawrence nearly 2 decades after graduation.
I'd love to talk about this. The Alumni Association, the Lawrence University Alumni Association, I should say, is the association of Lawrence alumni. So anyone who is an alum of Lawrence automatically becomes a member of the Lawrence University Alumni Association when they graduate. There's no membership application. There's no fee. You are a member of LUAA once you graduate from Lawrence. And the board of directors is ostensibly the leadership body of the Lawrence University Alumni Association. So we are the leadership representatives of the entire alumni community, which I think at this point is now around 22 or 23,000 people. One of the big ways the board's work affects students, especially in recent years, is that we're embracing the role of the student as future alumni. We've been taking steps, especially since COVID, to make alumni student engagement one of the hallmarks and the biggest sort of pieces of our work on a year-to-year basis. Because one of the biggest things that we can do as alumni, and especially alumni leaders, is help students navigate their pathways through Lawrence, and especially from Lawrence into the professional world. And I think one of the hardest things for me coming out of graduate school was showing up to this huge city and not really understanding what my pathways were to mentorship, to help just sort of figuring out how to do, basic things in my life in New York City, to questions about work, people looking for people that I knew and could sort of reach out to within my industry. It took me a little while, but I finally discovered there was this big community of Lawrence alum here, some of whom were from my era, some of whom were a little bit older. And, that was a network of people that over the next several years, I became really grateful for and dependent on as a means of really settling into this place that I was living as an adult now that I was finally out of school. And I bring up that anecdote simply to say there are countless opportunities for current Lawrence students and recent Lawrence alums to connect with alumni both in their area and also virtually, that I think we as an alumni association, and particularly the Alumni Association Board of Directors, have something of an obligation to really carve out for people. We have an obligation to really make sure that there are pathways for students to connect with alums as soon as possible, as soon as they need it, right? Ideally before they enter into the alumni community, but especially once they're there. It's the hardest thing in the world to sort of show up in a place and feel like you have nowhere to go and no one to turn to. And for Laurentians, the alumni network should be one of the first things they think of when it comes to getting out of school and asking for help. And frankly, we want to make sure that those opportunities are available. And it's one of the things that propels me to stay involved with Lawrence. Frankly, I joined the board with this idea that I just wanted to give back to Lawrence in some sort of more tangible way, not really knowing what that is. But over the course of almost 7 years on the board now, it's building those connections with students.
Time for one last question, and we give this one to all the folks who are on this podcast. So here's your chance to be the best answer of them all. What is your best final advice for Lawrence students in general, whether they are early in their Lawrence experience or on the cusp of graduation?
Well, I don't know if this is going to be the best answer you've ever heard, but it's the one I got, and it feels remarkably simple. Just stay open. Lawrence is a place that benefits people who are open to possibility and experience, whether that's interpersonally, meeting new people, meeting new professors, making connections that way, or being open to classes, that you might not have thought that you would ever want to take, but you like the professor, or you're interested in the specific subject matter, or you haven't gotten to take an independent study or do an independent study before, and this is your opportunity. I mean, that takes a level of openness that I think whether you're just starting or whether it's your last year or your last trimester at Lawrence, it's keeping that kind of openness front and center until the moment you walk across the main hall stage with your cap and gown and diploma is just going to pay you dividends. And it will also pay you dividends later once you've graduated, because carrying that sense of openness to possibility into the rest of your life, it sets you apart. And it certainly sets you apart in a professional world like mine, which is so large, so many people, so many different functions. I find that people who are Laurentians or people who think and act like Laurentians really do stand out. And that's a practice that you can start as soon as you get there.
Stay open. Good advice. Absolutely. For wide receivers and Lawrence students.
Yes, exactly right.
Matt Murphy from the Lawrence University class of 2006. Thank you for joining us on the Career Center podcast.
It's been my pleasure, Ty. Thanks for having me.